Hi there. The House of the Dragon premiere episode revealed that Aegon the Conqueror secretly had a prophetic dream that the White Walkers would return. And this is the hidden, real motivation for the Targaryen conquest. That they needed to unite the Seven Kingdoms, unite the realms of men into a united front against this apocalyptic winter, against the White Walkers, that the Targaryens were trying to save Westeros. I've talked about this more in other videos by subtopic. This one is the advanced one where I'm just diving right in, if you've already read the books, of the implications of this for certain book storylines. Particularly, the point of this video is Martin himself and showrunner Ryan Condal have specified that Aegon the Conqueror thought the White Walkers were coming back in his lifetime. At first, and towards the end of his life, when he realized, okay, they're not, he thought, okay, well, they'll come back in my son's lifetime. And for the rest of the first century of Targaryen rule, every king thought it was either coming in their lifetime or their son's lifetime relatively soon, and the kingdoms needed to be ready for it. They had no idea it was 300 years in the future, almost 200 years by the end. And going back in context, you can see how some of the decisions that they made, which at times seemed inscrutable or short-sighted, yeah, that would line up with they thought the White Walker attack was coming relatively soon. I've talked in another video that Martin probably knew this at least by the time he was writing the World of Ice and Fire source book around 2012-ish, because what became Fire and Blood was written as sidebars for the World book, so the entire Targaryen conquest chapter was pretty much done and printed in World of Ice and Fire. And then the Sons of the Dragon stuff in between that was also relatively, he said that was right after that, it was pretty much done by the time he wrote World of Ice and Fire, so he wrote those around 2012. There's other little hints in the World book about the Valyrians thought the doom was coming from across the sea, Martin's comments on Fire and Blood. I don't know about if you're going by the main novels, if he knew this by the first novel, but the specific info we have about the rule of Aegon the Conqueror and Aenys and Jaehaerys, that stuff anyway, he probably knew this when he was writing it. So going over that in context, that Red Team Review asked me, like, well, what do you mean that affects our knowledge of this? So that's why he asked, like, well, what do you mean? What could that have affected? That when you go down certain things we didn't understand before make more sense now. Well, to start with the actual quotes from Martin and Condal. First, Vanity Fair, George R. R. Martin himself, quote, I don't want to give too much away because some of this is going to be in the later books, but this is 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones. There was no sell-by date on that prophecy. That's the issue. The Targaryens that know about it are all thinking, okay, this is going to happen in my lifetime. I have to be prepared. Or, okay, it's going to happen in my son's lifetime. Nobody said it's going to happen 200 years from now. If the Dance of the Dragons had not happened, what would have happened to the next generation, or the generation after that? There's a lot to be unwound there, that presumably the knowledge was lost when everyone dies in the dance, and I guess Rhaegar rediscovered it in some lost letter that Viserys would have written or something, or maybe something Aegon himself wrote. They said Rhaegar found out about the prophecy because he was reading some ancient scroll about the Song of Ice and Fire. Then Ryan Condal. Now this is weird. It was a roundtable interview with multiple reporters from different sites. That it was with people from Insider, Pop Sugar, Metacritic, and Gizmodo. So you understand I had to cross-reference all four of these interviews to get the full discussion, much like cross-referencing Dance of the Dragon sources like Munkin and Eustace. I had to put together 4 different interviews that gave the full paragraph that he said about this. But essentially Condal said, quote, it really changed our thinking of the way we saw the Targaryen reign and what it was all about. The fact that Aegon had this knowledge, or perceived that he had this knowledge, because, it's just a dream, we don't know whether it's going to come true, but that he pursued the conquest thinking that this was an imminent problem. The dramatic irony of this is that we know with the remove of 300 years that it takes quite some time for this prophecy to come true. And later on he says, there's this idea that at some point in Aegon's later life, as he got older, he must have realized eventually, okay, the White Walkers weren't coming for dinner during his lifetime. And then we decided that if he believed in this enough to conquer Westeros, he surely would have then gone, well, he believed it enough to pass the idea on, that he went, okay, I'll pass it on to my son. It must be coming in my son's lifetime. He didn't think it was coming 300 years later. Now, we don't have audio of that. Like I said, it's this roundtable interview thing, but he reiterated many of these points, though not as thoroughly, in the official Game of Thrones podcast that they put out on YouTube with Jason Concepcion. It's nice. They have cast and crew come on. The one for episode 1, halfway through, Condal comes in and he does talk about this briefly, and he reiterates they didn't think this was coming 300 years from now. They thought it was happening in this generation or the next. And one key thing, though, is he chuckled and joked, well, every king of the first century thought this was going to happen. And he joked, except, maybe Maegor the Cruel didn't know because he was a usurper. But that makes sense, that Maegor usurped his older half-brother Aenys, killed Jaehaerys' older brothers, and he usurped the throne. Then when Aenys' son Jaehaerys, grandson of Aegon the Conqueror, rightfully took his throne and Maegor died, like I said, I'm a little worried about, Aegon told Aenys, how did it go from Aenys to Jaehaerys? Because Jaehaerys would have just told Viserys. I think Aegon the Uncrowned, who was Aenys' oldest son, who Maegor killed in dragon combat, he must have told his wife, who survived him, Rhaena, who then told Jaehaerys. That's my theory anyway. But, Maegor was not acting like the White Walkers are imminently coming. He was hammering his enemies and slaughtering everyone. Think about it, if the White Walkers came back at the height of Maegor's rule, they would have been screwed, because the kingdom was so divided. But Maegor probably didn't know that. So Condal himself, I don't think Maegor knew. So the issue here is those 3 kings of the first century. Aegon the Conqueror, his son Aenys, Aenys' son Jaehaerys after Maegor, and then presumably Jaehaerys told Viserys. So these 3 guys, just quickly going over, I'm not taking too much time to give accurate book quotes or anything, because I'm presuming you're familiar with this already. Things that happened in their reigns, which, in light of this revelation, we might want to re-examine. First off, Aegon the Conqueror, as pointed out before, Aegon's conquest actually happened with minimal loss of life for a continent-wide war. I mean, they even mention in the books there were a few climactic battles, but in terms of, compared to the Dance of the Dragons or the War of the Five Kings, there wasn't that much day-to-day raiding and stuff, where there's battle lines and the foragers and raiders are moving back and forth. It was a handful of climactic battles. It was decisive. And Aegon always made it a point to let his defeated enemies surrender with their lives and armies intact, so they could serve him. That, after he defeats the Lannisters at the Field of Fire, he lets King Lorne Lannister surrender. He let the Arryns surrender. Harrenhal's really the exception, not the rule, and even then he confronted him and said, I'm giving you the option to surrender. He refused. And that was like to make an example of him for anyone else who would stand against the dragons, and because the Ironborn were really tyrannical rulers, it got the Riverlords onto his side. But even then, when he defeated the Ironborn later, he let them pick the Greyjoys to rule them. That he could have gutted Westeros if he wanted to. He chose not to. He could have really tried to clamp down on Old Town and the Faith of the Seven, and part of that's good governance that he didn't. That, well, you don't want to rile up the faith too much, but generally he didn't hammer people who surrendered. That he raised them up and said, okay, now you're a Lord Paramount under me. A big point of this, I was watching David Lightbringer did a big 2-hour version of this. I'm doing a shorter one to keep it more focused. It wasn't his idea. He saw it on Reddit by someone else. This puts a whole new spin on specifically Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. That it took him so long to organize his armies coming down from the north that by the time he got south of the Neck, everyone else had been defeated. And their defeated armies had been added to the Targaryen army, so now they were stronger than ever. And you're seeing these dragons that have clearly dominated the battlefield. Torrhen looks around and goes, yeah, there's no way we can win this militarily. So he surrendered without a fight to keep his armies intact, because what's the point? And, winter is coming. we need them to harvest. There might be wildling raids that I need to keep my men intact. That's the traditional wisdom we've been told, but what if Aegon told him, I had a prophetic dream about the White Walkers, and I know you take that seriously? Might have pushed him over the top to, okay, I'll surrender. Another thing is he realized he couldn't win militarily, but it says his bastard half-brother, Brandon Snow, said, well, we might sneak into their camp and try to assassinate them. Well, he said, we'll try to kill the dragons, and failing that, okay, if you think killing the dragons, even with weirwood bows, is impossible, we should at least try to assassinate their riders. They're humans, they're mortal, we can try to kill Aegon and his sisters. And he said, it's not worth it, let's just surrender. There were things they could have done. I mean, Dorne managed to, with 1,000,001 lucky shot, managed to take out Meraxes and Rhaenys a couple of years later. But I'll get to that, but just maybe he told the Starks something. What's weird is I didn't know this that was leaked out months ahead of time that they're going to introduce this prophecy. I didn't know that he outright would say Aegon called his prophetic dream the Song of Ice and Fire. And we only heard that in the books, Rhaegar saying that. Presumably he rediscovered that Aegon called it that. What's the other time in the books where we hear about that phrasing, that specifically something of ice and fire, that the Pact of Ice and Fire? Beginning of the Dance of the Dragons, when Rhaenyra sends her eldest son, Jake Velaryon, on Dragonback north to Winterfell to get them an alliance, they say, okay, and we've supported her claim before, but Jake, when you sit the Iron Throne, you don't have children now, but you have to promise that when you have a daughter, she will marry my eldest son. That Cregan Stark, he had like a 1-year-old son. He said, as part of this alliance pact, promise that one of your daughters will marry my son. Because you usually seal alliances with marriages like that. And they said they called it the Pact of Ice and Fire. And that brings up all these other, the mysterious things that happened with Jake at Winterfell, that some historians report the rumor that they never proved, that Cregan had this mysterious bastard half-sister, Sarah Snow, and that Jake fell in love with her and married her, and they made love in front of the Heart Tree. And was this like a prototype attempt at, he heard the full prophecy, and a Targaryen needs to get a Stark girl pregnant because the prince that was promised will be from the combination of ice and fire from their bloodlines? Was this him trying to do what Rhaegar ultimately did? And then it hints maybe he even left a dragon egg behind. We don't know. And it'll be weird if the TV show actually gives revelations on this, because it seems like Martin sure as hell intended more than what he was hinting at. He knew he'd be able to tell more later, I don't know. So the impact on the relationship with the Starks, the Pact of Ice and Fire, that'll be coming up in next season, actually, because Cregan and everything will happen beginning of season 2. But that's just the general idea that Aegon, okay, he raised up defeated enemies because he wanted their armies intact to fight the White Walkers. It wouldn't make sense to burn out and hammer down all of the armies of the surviving armies of the Reach and the Westerlands. That even at the Field of Fire, they only lost something like 10,000 men out of 50,000. That he didn't systematically burn and kill everyone. He said, your surviving troops will serve me now. Like 80% or something. That he wanted armies intact for what he thought was an imminent White Walker invasion. And later in life, this is the thing that I made this video for. The rest is just supplement. The Dornish letter that ended the First Dornish War. That it's a big mystery in the books that the Dornish War had turned into an insurgency and it was just grinding on. It was like Vietnam. It was the Targaryen dragons come in like helicopters, napalming every major town and castle, but they resort to guerrilla warfare. The Dornish lost a lot of people. It's not like they ran circles around the Targaryens. It was gutted, Dorne. But militarily, their resistance was still intact. They were fighting tooth and nail. They were harassing supply lines. The Targaryens were no closer to holding Dorne than they were years before. This just dragged on. Even Rhaenys got killed on Meraxes. That was a 1 in a million shot. A scorpion bolt managed to hit her in the eye as she was mid-flight, and she fell from the air, hundreds of feet in the air, and no one could have survived a fall like that. So they got really mad, burned them out more because they lost their sister, but Years later, the old, really old Princess of Dorne finally died, and her son, himself an elderly man by this point, he became Prince of Dorne, and he was tired of war and all the bloodshed. He wanted it to end, so he sent peace feelers. He sent a peace delegation with his daughter to Aegon's court in King's Landing. And she said, we're offering peace on equal terms, that we will remain independent and we'll just stop attacking you with harassment, leave Dorne, and we will be two kingdoms at peace. And they weren't really going to do it, but then she handed Aegon this sealed letter from her father, and it's important enough there's artwork of it, official commissioned artwork. And to this day, it says historians do not know what was in that letter because Aegon destroyed it. But there's two theories, and it's weird that everyone latches on to the first one, even when in the source it says there's one of two possibilities, maybe more, that have been suggested over time. Maybe both, maybe neither. The first one is speculating that Rhaenys survived. This is the older Rhaenys, you understand, that the queen who never was Rhaenys was named after. That Conquest Rhaenys, the theory is that she somehow survived her fall, badly injured and crippled, and the Dornish captured her and had been slowly torturing her in a dungeon for years, and the letter said, we will end her suffering with the mercy of a quick death and stop slowly carving her up if you withdraw. That's the most dramatic option, but a person can't survive a fall from hundreds of feet in the air like that. It's physics. It's the whole, well, Superman will catch Lois at the last minute. No, Spider-Man will catch Gwen Stacy at the last minute of the fall, then when the Green Goblin throws her off the bridge. Her organs would be crushed from the impact of being caught. Like, you can't physically survive a fall like that, no matter how much padding you have. Even over water, the force would kill you. And this was sand. This was rock. She could not have survived a fall on the wing like that. And even then, that he'd surrender without it, it doesn't. I always lean towards the second option, which people seem to ignore. It's that people don't even debate this. They treat that as fact when it was a suggestion. The second option is it suggests, maybe it was threatening, we have hired the Faceless Men to kill your son and heir, Aenys, your only child with Rhaenys, and if you don't withdraw, we will kill him. That we've reached a point, well, we will beggar our kingdom, our principality, we will beggar our realm, pay everything we have to get the Faceless Men to take a contract to kill Aenys, and it will succeed because they're the Faceless Men. And that it included, like, specific details that only some spies in the Red Keep could know, that, like, and we know this is where the room he sleeps in, these are the hours he's there, like, enough detail that it freaked out Aegon, that all we know is his reaction to reading the letter, because he read it in public, he just read it silently, that whatever it was shocked him so much that he clenched his fist around the hand was holding the parchment, clenched it so hard that his nails drew blood from his palm. That it was something that shocked him. Maybe Rhaenys, but I think she died in the fall. That's just physics. And I was leaning towards, of these two options, it's more likely that it was some really specific detail on, we are inside your house. We could easily kill Aenys if we wanted to, but I don't. Please leave in peace. What if it was something else entirely? Martin came up with that chapter stuff in the first Dornish around the same time he was writing. He wrote it for the World Book. What if it was secretly something like, we have spies in the Red Keep, because there's spies everywhere in the walls. Not, we know where Aenys sleeps, but we have overheard you discussing the Song of Ice and Fire with your close family members, or with just Aenys. And because all the rest of Westeros, all of your kingdom now is between us and the Wall, between Dorne and the White Walkers, if the White Walkers come back within our lifetimes, we will not ally with you. We will keep fighting you on a second front, so you have to divide your forces. And the White Walkers will hit you harder because you have to leave men guarding the passes of Dorne. That, no, we will not ally against the common threat if you stay at war with us. But if you withdraw, and the White Walkers do come back, we will think of maybe allying with you on equal terms as an independent kingdom, send our forces against the common enemy. That maybe it freaked him out. They found out about the Song of Ice and Fire, and that I'm really doing this because of the White Walker threat. And yeah, how many of us, when we were making fan theories about what the White Walker War would be like, pointed out Dorne is the last place they would reach, and it is incredibly defensible because of the mountain passes overland. That is the last place they would hit, and just if the Dornish found out about that, that is the perfect thing to threaten him with. That you believe this is coming in your lifetime, and we will not stop if you keep fighting us if they come back. And notice how, in the rest of his reign after that, Aegon tried really hard to maintain good relations with Dorne. Part of this is just, when you go to war, you commit to war all out. When you decide you're at peace, you're all out for peace. That he tried really hard to make peacefully. He would go to peace feasts with them on anniversaries of the peace agreement on a regular basis. He'd fly his dragons to Sunspear with Aenys to celebrate, okay, it's a decade of peace. It's 20 years of peace with them. That he tried really hard to keep the peace with them instead of, we'll grind you bastards down later with attrition. No, he tried really hard to do that, as if he was trying to win them back. Again, makes sense if he thought the White Walkers would come back in his lifetime. But towards the end of his life, also, that might be the point where he decided, might be when the letter came, is also when he decided, this might not happen in my lifetime, but it might happen in my son's lifetime. So I'd better punt and just make peace with them now. That might be it. So the end of the First Dornish War and his actions towards Dorne after that, we have to now put in the context of, did they find out about the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy and threaten him about it? That we won't stop if that happens. Moving on to the reign of his son Aenys, this just brings up that why was he so unwilling to fight people? That at the beginning of his reign, there were these 4 pop-up rebellions of people trying their luck at the new king of the new dynasty. That there was one at Harrenhal, a bigger one in the Vale at the Eyrie that was more organized. The Iron Islands revolted, and there was the first Vulture King in Dorne, which was like a proxy war because it was a raider king secretly aided by the Dornish. Let's not kid ourselves. And he just dithered and said, can't we do this diplomatically? Again, what if, like his father, he was, I don't want to waste forces fighting each other when the White Walkers might be coming imminently. So he hesitated, delayed. Ultimately, local lords had to handle all of these things for him. He was very indecisive about it. And another big thing with Aenys that you just smack your forehead and go, why did you do that? Is after all the trouble he got in with the Faith of the Seven, that when he was going to marry, he married, they suggested, well, maybe there could be an incest marriage. He said, no, he'll marry Alyssa Velaryon. Don't marry, they didn't want to marry Maegor to Alyssa. All this other stuff. And he really messed up his relationship with the Faith after letting the Iron Islands kick out the Septons. After more than one warning from the Faith, he then announced later, hey, I'm marrying my son and daughter together. Why? It was Maegor, they suggested maybe he can marry his daughter, Rhaena. And he said, no. The Faith would revolt over that. Then a few years later, Aenys himself married Rhaena to his son. An incest marriage? Why did he do that? Maybe as he dwelled on the prophecy, he thought we need to maintain they think there's a tie between being pure-blooded Targaryens through incest, and it's tied to the dragon riding gene, their ability to control dragons. So maybe what motivated him is he thought, if it's not coming in my lifetime, it'll come in my son's lifetime, and he needs pure-blooded sons of his own to ride dragons. That might be why Aenys did something what seems crazy, but from his perspective he reached an age where he thought, this isn't happening in my lifetime, it's happening in my son's lifetime, need more dragon riders. Possibly. Also, he might have been a weakling who just was an idiot. But no, he generally was diplomatic enough. He had every warning not to do that. Finally, we get to Jaehaerys, who he strengthened the kingdom, he bound it up, he used diplomacy. He could have slaughtered the remaining, the remainder of the Faith. The Faith was really hammered. Well, he wanted to bind the kingdom together because he thought at first there was going to be a White Walker invasion, perhaps in his own lifetime. So he kept trying to strengthen up the realm. It's possible, what if, because this is the last thing that Martin wrote chronologically, were the Jaehaerys linker chapters. He wrote those like in early 2018, because the book came out late 2018. So within a year of when he put out that video saying maybe Aegon had a prophecy the White Walkers are coming back. Remember the Shivers Plague, which is like a whole chapter in Fire and Blood, that there was, in 59 AC, there was this really bad winter, and a huge plague called the Shivers came with it. Some have even speculating in book fandom, did the White Walkers send this as a test run or something? Or was it just a really bad winter with a really bad plague? We don't know. Would Jaehaerys himself, knowing of this prophecy, wonder, is this it? It's a winter that's lasted a full calendar year. Is this the return of the White Walkers? But then it wasn't. And how would this affect how he went about everything? That he wasn't trying to conquer Dorne because he thought he needed them on his side and thought maybe Viserys... I wonder if this will come up in House of the Dragon, that in Fire and Blood it says Viserys, when he's toying with the ideas of who is Rhaenyra going to marry to bind the realm together, he toyed with the idea of maybe she could marry one of the Martells to bring them in through marriage alliance, which ultimately did happen over 100 years later. 70 years later. One of with Daeron II's marriage brought Dorne in. So it's not that crazy of an idea. We'll bring the Dornish in through marriage alliance, was something at least going back to Viserys I. I wonder if they'll emphasize that around episode 4-ish, because we think that's based on the casting. That's when the courtship of Rhaenyra plotline comes up. Of why not bring Dorne into the fold? We need them for the White Walker War. I really hope that comes up then. But for Jaehaerys himself, just he was strengthening the realm, building a unified code of laws. All of this was build up armies, build up prosperity. He doubled the population of Westeros in his lifetime with all of his peace and roads and trade. He was building armies. You build more people. You just and part of this is good governance. It also makes you really prepared for an invasion by the White Walkers. But the one big point I'll make, 2 points to make about Jaehaerys are, first, more so than any of the other early Targaryen kings, he heavily patronized the Night's Watch. That he gave them a lot of funds and Alicent, funding to build new castles, told them to abandon the Night Fort because it was too big to maintain or defend, close the Night Fort, move to a more defensible fort, are the actions of someone who thought the wall would come under imminent attack. And probably one of the only things that Jaehaerys ever did that didn't seem to make sense, he doubled the size of the gift lands south of the wall. He doubled them, making the new gift, even though this really pissed off the Starks. They said, well, we can administer those lands better. For the moment, you're giving more land to feed the Watch, but on a scale of generations, the new gift will gradually fall into ruin. And because the Watch is always focused on the threats north of the wall, not administering farmland. And this extended the point that 30 years later, at the Great Council, the Starks were one of only 2 great houses to vote against his preferred heir, that Jaehaerys openly said, I want Viserys to be the heir. They voted against him for Laenor, I guess, Rhaenys in the TV show, because they were annoyed at Jaehaerys, even 30 years later, that you took away our lands. To give the Watch a bunch of extra farmland that they don't really need right now. And maybe Jaehaerys thought that the Night's Watch would soon need a lot of land to feed a lot of people to fight against the White Walkers attacking. That if Martin's and Condell's whole point is every king thought the White Walker War would happen in their lifetime, and then towards the end of their lives went, okay, maybe it'll happen in my son's lifetime, I should pass it on. That was the one short-sighted thing Jaehaerys ever really did, the new gift land deal. But why would you seize land to immediately give it to the Night's Watch if it'll fall into disuse after a couple of generations? Because he was focused on this generation. Makes a lot more sense now. And last thing, which seems kind of obvious. When Jaehaerys built the Royal Highway Network, what was the first one he started and first completed? The King's Road, from King's Landing to the Wall. Why would you start with that? I mean, objectively. If anything, wouldn't he have made a highway going from King's Landing to Old Town first, the Rose Road? Why didn't he start with the Rose Road as this big overland highway, or the River Road to Lannisport? That of all of the highways that they built in Westeros, why would you make one going straight north past the Neck all the way to Winterfell and the Wall? That isn't quite the biggest overland trade route they have. And yeah, some of it is they said, well, these were pre-existing highways, some of them that we just improved to cobble together the Royal Highway network to better standards. There was probably already a road going that way, but the first highway Jaehaerys built went straight from King's Landing to the Wall rather than to Old Town, which was the biggest city on the continent up until then. And he was making all these big donations to the Night's Watch, both in terms of more castles, and he doubled their lands, which would only be useful for maybe a generation, and they'd wear out in 40 years. He wasn't thinking that far ahead, because he thought the White Walkers were coming soon. So yeah, this puts a lot more context on. Now, out of universe, when Martin was writing this for the World Book, and there's other hints in the World Book, like that line about, in the Old Town chapter, Barth said that there was a Valyrian prophecy that the doom of men would come from the lands beyond the Narrow Sea. Martin was thinking of this from at least 2012-ish, when he was writing the novellas that became Targaryen Conquest, Sons of the Dragon. Even though Fire and Blood was published as a standalone in 2018, he knew this in 2012 when he was coming up with it. So you have to reassess certain things the Targaryen kings of the first century did, as they thought the White Walkers were coming back in their lifetimes. And it'll be interesting to see as the season progresses how this affects, like, will Viserys go, we need to get Dorne on our side with a marriage alliance, only for it to be shot down. But we know this will affect Rhaenyra and certain other things she does, but this is just my quick and dirty sloppy copy of this, that after Season 1 we'll be analyzing this a lot more, but I just wanted to bring it up quickly, how this forces us to reinterpret the first half of Fire and Blood. The first quarter of it, I mean, before the Dance of the Dragons. That if they knew, and how this would have affected them.